happened was, what happened was, having a hard time, lots of false starts here. What happened was, in Hebrew, that first letter there, it's called a hey, makes the H sound. But in Greek, there's not a letter that makes the H sound. And instead, it's a breath mark. It's what's over the alpha. It's the third word down. It looks like a kind of a backwards apostrophe. That is how you express the H sound in Greek. And so Harmageddon is how it should be pronounced, but when it got transliterated or moved from the Greek alphabet, that is, into an English alphabet, it became Armageddon. So Har Megiddo means Mount Megiddo or mountain Megiddo. Armageddon is just really a mispronunciation of it. So one of the places we'll be going to, if you didn't already know this, is Armageddon. So as a young undergraduate in the early 1990s, my first time in Israel, we made it down to Mount Megiddo. It's a very important site historically and geographically. It was on the King's Road that went from Egypt up into Assyria. And so it was traveled for years and years. So we get there, and of course, you're familiar, as I was, as a 19-year-old or 20-year-old, however old I was then, of the biblical account in Revelation that says that the battles or the armies gather for a battle at Armageddon. So I was there, and I made comment to my Old Testament professor who was with us, one of the folks leading the trip, that I can't believe I've made it to Armageddon and I didn't even get hurt. He unceremoniously picked up a rock and threw it at me, and it hurt. I mean, it hit me. Like, I can't imagine doing that to one of my students today. Like, if I hit one of my students with a rock, it'd be the end of me. I'd be out. They're like, get rid of the abusive professor. But anyway, back in the day, professors were allowed to mistreat students more than we are now. So the rock hit me. It hurt. In fact, I recently reconnected with that professor, and I reminded him of the event, which he did not remember, but I remembered it. So his comment was there. You can say you were wounded at Armageddon. But in any case, this is from the Mount Megiddo, from the top of Armageddon. This looks out into the Jezreel Valley. And that center little hill is Mount Tabor, which is thought to be the mountain of transfiguration. And if you're looking to your right, so we're looking north, so it would be to the northwest. The second hill that you can kind of see a town that's around it, that's Nazareth. So you can kind of this is the Galilee, the region of the Galilee, and you can kind of see kind of across the way Mount Tabor, and then you can see Nazareth. So a little bit more about Megiddo. This is an artist rendition. Nope, that's not the artist rendition. We'll get there in a second. But kind of standing down, you see this kind of V shape that we're kind of looking through. We're still looking north. So 130, 140, 150 years ago, archaeologists had a very kind of an aggressive approach to an archaeological site. So what has happened here is a group from the University of Chicago has come in, and they've just cut this huge wedge out. We wouldn't do that today. We'd be more careful and kind of go down and kind of get into the stratification to get a little lower. We would go down kind of bit by bit, but they just kind of cut this huge thing out. And that's what you see here. This is a artist rendition of what Megiddo would have looked like. Now we're looking kind of east. So a few things to note. In the ancient world, there are a few things that you needed in order to have a good place for civilization. You needed fresh water, right? Because humans need water to live. And you needed a high place, because if you could build on the mountain, on the tell, is a Hebrew word meaning mound. If you could build on the mound or the tell, you would have the military advantage of kind of defending yourselves. And so this is on a string of mountains. The mountain to its west is Mount Carmel, and you've heard of a lot of those stories. Elijah on Mount Carmel in the battle with the prophets of Baal, or the Carmelites. It's a convent. The nuns, Mother Teresa was a Carmelite nun based on Mount Carmel. And so this is the next mountain over, and it is Mount Megiddo. So if you see here, you can see kind of that gate kind of there at the bottom. And as you would go in the gate, the gate would turn. So you would kind of go in and have to take a left-hand turn. The idea behind that is, one, if an army was coming in, you don't want them they break through the first gate to be right at your door front. And so that's why they had the two gates, kind of come in the first one and then have to turn. And then also by forcing them to turn left, typically they would kind of hold their shields in one hand and their sword in another. The sword would be further away from you. And so as they came in, you would have an advantage. It might be difficult to see here, or not difficult to see, but kind of towards the top of the city there is kind of a walled in area with what looks like barracks. So those would have been the stables. And then to the right of that, it looks, again, it's kind of walled in, but that would have been the well. So you go from there, you go down, 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 until eventually you would have access to your natural water. So Megiddo is a very ancient site. So again, as we were talking about last week, archaeologists, when they're identifying sites like this, talk about civilizations. Civilizations, not generations, like from, grandparent to parent to child, but civilizations. And so what would happen is a civilization would build on the mound, and then after who knows how long, maybe 100 years, maybe 200 years, someone else would come along and say, man, that's a desirable spot, let's attack. And so they would, and they would destroy it. And then someone else would build again, and then they'd destroy it, and they build again and destroy it. And so after time, the mounds would get higher. So as you dig down through the mounds, you're going to go through various civilizations. Archaeologists have identified 32 different civilizations at Megiddo. That's a ton. And if you start at the top and start to work your way down, each time you go down a level of strata, you're moving back another civilization. And so they found 32. And if you start at your top and you work down to number 8, you're at the time of King Solomon. So just think of that. There's 32 total. We've worked down 8, and we're already to Solomon. So Preston, help me with the math. How many strata are left after that? You're muted. 24?
Yeah, 24. I said 24
right.
the first time. You didn't
Gotcha.
hear me.
I didn't hear you. All right. I asked Preston because he's a math teacher and he speaks math better than I do. So think of that. 24 different civilizations predating Solomon. It is a really, really ancient site. So eventually you get down to some of the Egyptians, some of the old Egyptian pharaohs, and then you get even earlier than that. Like, this is practically prehistoric, like before we've been keeping records of humans. That's how old Megiddo is. It's kind of like an ideal spot. Like, I showed you even today what that valley looks like in front of it in that previous picture. So we'll go back there. See, it's a gorgeous valley. It's great weather. It's great land. And so to have that place to farm, to have this, high city to protect yourself from, and if you're in the city, to nevertheless still have access to water, again, just made it an ideal place. And did you have a question, Ange? Yeah, so Angela's making a good point here. So let's say there are two in the ancient world, in this part of on the globe, there were two major seats of civilization. One is around the Nile and the various kind of Egyptians and the Ptolemies and other civilizations that use the Nile. And the other is around the Tigris and Euphrates. So the ancient civilizations of Assyria and Babylon and Sumeria. I kind of got those out of order, but you know what I'm talking about. So in between the two is largely the Arabian Desert. You might be able to make your way through there with a person or two, but you're not going to move an army through the desert. So if you're going to go from Mesopotamia, which is the Tigris and Euphrates, down to Egypt, or one way or the other, you kind of have to hug the Mediterranean until you get up to Megiddo, and that's where you would cut across. You would cut through the Jezreel Valley and then go up to would be Damascus and Syria, and then on over into what today we would call Iraq, right? So you get to Nineveh and then go down through the Mesopotamian Valley between the Tigris and Euphrates. So those two major civilizations were kind of connected by this little land bridge, and the center of that little land bridge is here at Megiddo. So it's just this, again, this kind of quintessential place. Because it was so desirable, it was often a place that the various kings or pharaohs would fight for. And so it had a history of being a place of battle. So by the time John is writing Revelation, he's talking about an ultimate battle, and he's using Megiddo or Armageddon as a metaphor because that was kind of the place of battle, right? Now, the last civilization that was there, so the civilization that would be on the top, right? Remembering that you have to work down to go back in time. So the civilization on the top was actually the Persians. It wasn't used after the Persians. The next major civilization to come through was the Greeks, and the Greeks had a different kind of philosophy of how they built. They didn't like to build up on the mounds. They liked to build down on flat land and have very organized kind of planned cities. One of the reasons they were able to do that was the power of the Greek army. They weren't concerned about being attacked because they were the most powerful presence, you know, on the planet, or at least in that section of the planet. And so because their borders were so secure, they built their cities on flat ground. And we'll see one of those cities as well. Beit Shan is a Greek city, one of the Decapolis, one of the 10 cities, the Decapolis. So we're going to Beit Shan, and we'll see there how it was built. There is a mound there, but the city wasn't built upon it. It was built down flat, and it has a major thoroughfare running north and south called the Cardo, right? Which Cardia is the Greek word for heart. And we might even use a similar terminology. Like if I talked about the major arteries that run up and down the East Coast, I might talk about I-95 and I-75, right? I can talk about those being arteries on which traffic moves. So that same metaphor, right, is used there.
Hey, Robbie.
So, yes, please.
Back to that other picture, please.
Which one?
The one right before that one. This one.
Okay.
So can you tell us, is this where we were standing when Amnon was doing all of his explanation? Were we standing on this point?
We were. So
can you tell me which mountain is like it? What's the mountain there in the middle?
In the middle, that's Mount Tabor.
Okay.
Considered the Mount of Transfiguration.
Okay.
And then the one to the right is Nazareth.
Okay. And where and Mount Carmel would be where?
Mount Carmel is not in this picture, but it would be to our left.
Okay.
So we're looking north, and so our left would be west, and it's the next major mountain in the range here.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure thing. And from this picture, if you look here on the left, there's that little covering area where people stand. That's right. That's the same covering area. If I can get back here. Oops, what have I done? There we go. That's the same covering area here to the left.
Okay,
So we're
I know
kind
where
of
you're
on that. Yeah, we're on that slope there.
okay.
All right. So again, if we look in the center of the city here, that kind of walled off area, those were the stables. So this is what that actual area looks like today. Oops, not there. There. And so these big stone, I don't know, blocks are troughs. They would have held water, and you would have kind of pulled your, horse up to it, and your horse would have drank from it. So when it says that Jesus was laid in a manger, it would probably look like this. This is what the manger would have looked like. Most likely, it would have been made of stone, unlike the wooden ones, or better yet, the plastic ones that we put in our front yard that are illuminated. Yeah. So this is what you should think of, and this is that that same stable that was in the artist rendering. And so in First Kings, it speaks of Solomon and all these horses and chariots that he had, and it mentions how many he had at Megiddo. And so this is that place. This next picture kind of shows the walkway that's now been built that would have gone from the top of the mountain down to its water source. Again, it would have been within the walled city. So in the artist's rendering, it's the part that's in the top right. It looks like a little square. You can kind of see it. So it's still open to this day. And we will walk down these stairs and go through a little tunnel. It's like there's a boardwalk. We don't actually get wet. But that's how they would have accessed their water. And it's why, or one of the reasons why, it was such an ideal place to build, and why so many people built there over the years, because it's a high place. And again, it had fantastic access to a natural spring. All right, so I'm going to shift on us a little bit. And again, if anybody has any questions, just speak up. Just unmute yourself and tell me what you'd like to know. We've moved now over to the coast. So the water here is the Mediterranean. And what's written there on the screen, the harbor, you can now see it has like land that kind of comes out, and it looks like that's a relatively natural harbor. But it was not originally a natural harbor. It was built by Herod the Great. So you know of Herod the Great because he tried to have Jesus killed when he was a baby. But what you might not know about Herod is he was an extraordinary builder. And this is one of the places he built. It's called Caesarea, or Caesarea by the Sea, Caesarea Maritima. And he started by building rafts and floating kind of boulders out into the Mediterranean, and then they would sink the raft where they wanted it, and so the boulder would drop to the bottom of the sea, and they would just do it over and over and over and over until they built that whole section that comes out. So that's kind of artificially made, and it created a harbor because Israel didn't have a natural harbor that could have kind of welcomed the kind of trade and the military kind of ships during the Roman time. And so Herod had one built. And this would become the capital city for Sumeria and Judea. So like when after Herod, well, he had a son, Archelaus, who ruled for a little while, but he didn't do a very good job. And so his administration was taken away from him, and they set up a Roman governor, which is why when Jesus was crucified, he was tried before Pilate. Pilate would have lived here in Caesarea. This was the Roman headquarters. In fact, we'll see, we found, or I say we, like I was one of the archaeologists, it's been found a inscription that was found in the Colosseum, or the theater, that it mentions that Pilate was the governor there. We'll see a replica of it it's kind of sitting out in the weather, but it's an excellent replica. The actual one is in the Jerusalem Museum in Jerusalem. But Caesarea plays other roles in the New Testament. So after Paul is arrested, after his third missionary journey, he's back in Jerusalem and he gets arrested. A plot is made for his life. You'll remember the story out of Acts. You know, there are 40 people who make a vow that they're not going to eat again until they've killed Paul. And the Roman centurion hears about this, and so he has Paul whisked away, and he takes them to Caesarea, where originally he is. Let's see if I can get their names right. I'm not very good with names. Who was the first one? Was it Festus? And then later Felix. Herod Agrippa would come down from Galilee, Herod Agrippa II, and he too would kind of hear Paul. I'm pretty sure I heard that sermon 1,000 times as a kid in a youth group, because Agrippa II says, that Paul, thou almost persuadeth me, to quote the King James. And then the youth pastor would say, don't be almost persuaded, come down and give your heart to God. I don't know if anybody else heard that sermon. I know I heard it at least 1,000 times. But Paul would spend 2 years in prison here in Caesarea. A good part of this has been excavated and has been reconstructed. So this is, again, an artist's rendering of what it would look like. So in this kind of lower right-hand corner, we see the typical Roman theater. There's one here that we'll see that has been, again, kind of largely reconstructed. What you see that is kind of jetting out to the left was a palace for Herod the Great, and the ruins of it, we can see kind of the foundation of it. There in the middle is a hippodrome. It looks like a small NASCAR track, but they didn't have NASCAR then. But they did raise horses. At this point, and I'll show you a picture in a second, about half of that hippodrome now would be underwater. Like the Mediterranean is further up than it used to be. But you can still see, like, literally what would have been the seats on the hippodrome that look basically like a small football stadium that you might think of like at a high school. But this is a typical kind of Roman city with roads that are very straight, kind of north-south and east-west. This one, of course, is built on the coast, so it's a little different, and it has the harbor to the north. This is the current theater. So you can tell that a lot of this has been reconstructed. Maybe you can't tell, but a lot of this has been reconstructed. It wasn't found quite like this, but they currently use it. The Israelis do for concerts and things. I mean, obviously you can see the chairs at the bottom. Those don't come from the first century. But it was on one of these seats that was picked up. I guess the stone must have been reused at one time because the writing was face down. And when they were reconstructing it, they picked it up, and that's where they found the inscription to Pilate, which it looks like this. It's kind of hard to make out here. But so this is just outside of where that theater is. And those columns over there represent kind of part of what was at one time Herod the Great's palace, later probably used by Pilate. But this inscription is one of the few non-literary, I guess it is literary, but kind of inscribed in stone references to Pilate. And you can kind of see part of his name there at the end. I wish I had a picture of it. Next to it, it kind of shows you, there's a picture that shows you what you're looking at a bit and kind of says, this is the letters that you see, and here's the letters that we're imagining have kind of been corroded, and then it has a translation. So you'll know what it is. There's a translation in Hebrew, and there's a translation in English. This is a Roman aqueduct that was built kind of coming into Caesarea Maritima. The Romans were really fantastic builders. Plumbing in the ancient world works much like plumbing does today. We haven't advanced too much, really. It's all based on gravity. If you start at a higher point and you can slowly lower your pitch, you can move water from one location to another location. And so this is outside of Caesarea, but typically we do drive by and get out for a second and take a few pictures. It's a sight to see. Just on the other side of this is the Mediterranean. So I'm shifting on us now again. We've gone from the coast where we started in the Galilee at Megiddo. Then we went over to the coast to Caesarea Maritima, which is just south of Mount Carmel. So the distance from Caesarea to Megiddo is not very far. I would say certainly less than an hour's drive. But now we've gone way south in the Jordan Valley, and this place is called Qumran. And this particular cave that you see there in the middle was cave number 4. So you may be familiar that there was a collection of scrolls found in this community, and they are known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls contain a lot of scripture and a lot of commentary on scripture, as well as their community rule, like how they were going to live together. So this community at Qumran was a separatist community. They kind of felt like the worship at the temple was corrupt, and that they needed to kind of remove themselves from that system and kind of wait on the coming of the Messiah. Their literary prowess was pretty significant. So the scrolls, and I think I have a picture of some here in a minute. The scrolls were found in the late 1940s. I think 1947 was the first scroll that was found. And at least the story that is told was that a Bedouin boy was kind of trying to chase down a goat or a sheep that he had lost. And he was taking rocks and kind of throwing them in these various caves. Let's see if I have another picture of some of the caves. Like these caves are along the escarpment, right, along the mountainside. And he's throwing rocks into caves, and he hears this pottery break. And so he goes in to investigate. And so in these kind of pottery pots, these vessels, they found these ancient scrolls. And then they went to the university and they, brought out the scholars, and they found out that these were actually ancient texts. They predate Jesus by about 100 years. And so our oldest copy of the Hebrew scriptures in Hebrew was about the 9th century AD. So roughly 900 years after Jesus. So think of that. The oldest copies we had of the Hebrew Bible in Hebrew was about 900 years after Jesus, until the 1940s when we found these. This is 1,000 years older. 1,000 years older the Dead Sea Scrolls are than our oldest copies in Hebrew. And they contain all of what we might call the Old Testament, with the exception of the book of Esther. There was no copy of Esther that was found. And then you also get kind of commentary, so you can kind of see how they were reading those texts, which is really, really fascinating. Their community had a leader. The text referred to him as the teacher of righteousness.
Can you all hear him? Yeah, we lost your volume.
Okay.
It's back. You were back for a second.
Am I there now?
Yeah. Yep.
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. Thanks for catching that, Ange. But only one of them has a microphone, yeah? Or did they both? use them if you just switch to.
Can y'all hear us? Yeah, can someone say something?
I can hear you fine on my end.
Excellent. Great. Yeah, that's even better for me.
We hear you.
Great.
I can hear you.
Okay. So to the Dead Sea Scrolls. So I made these kind of scrolls were found. When you see a reference to the scrolls, it's often 1Q something, something, something. So the first number refers to the cave it was found in. They just numbered the caves. The Q refers to Qumran, which is the name of the village. And then there's a variety of other things, like the next bit you might be a reference to what it is. Like, was it the community document, which is, the names of them are in English. English scholars, American scholars were very influential in the study of these texts. What's great about it, I mean, there's lots of things that are great about it. As a historian, I just love the fact that we found texts that are that much older. But then also we get kind of insight into how Jews of Jesus's day were reading these texts. Like, it's taught us so much. Now, granted, they were a separatist group. I kind of kid my students at the university that this Qumran community was a bit like the homeschoolers. You know, they didn't like the way things were going in the public sector, and so they kind of had separated themselves out and had become, you know, a bit separatist. And I think that's a legitimate analogy, although of course it is just an analogy. But we did find that there is a number or evidence that there are a number of children that were cared for by this community. So they had like taken orphans, and also maybe some widows as well. There's been some talk that perhaps John the Baptist might have been affiliated with the group at one time. He is known to have been working in this area. The Jordan is just a stone's throw. In fact, from here, you can see the Jordan River and you can see the Dead Sea. And they did practice a form of baptism. This is called a mikvah. And Judaism of the day would have a ritual cleansing where you would baptize yourself. So water would run in, and because of the way it was constructed, also out, because you needed moving water for cleansing, they thought. And so you would kind of undress, and then you'd walk yourself down into the water, and you'd walk yourself back out. So a couple of ways in which that seemed to differentiate from John's baptism. One, this was, you would do it to yourself as opposed to having somebody baptize you. Two, this is something that you do on a regular basis and kind of instead of once and for all. And then three, it doesn't seem in any way to be a reference to an initiate. It wasn't like an outsider coming in that's being a part of it. It's something that would happen to those who were already in the group, where Christian baptism is something that is practiced by those who have not yet been a part of the group, and this is kind of an expression of them becoming part of the group. It's an initiation. So that's another way in which it's different. This has been reconstructed. When we get to Qumran, they do a great job. They'll do a little black line to show you kind of where things were when they first found them, and then they've built on top of it just a bit to help your eyes imagine what it would have looked like. So I have a picture of a mikveh here on the left, and you can see that has not been reconstructed, but you can kind of tell what an archaeologist kind of saw and then what they made. And then here on the right are some of the actual pots that the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in. So that's pretty neat. This is a bit of the scroll of Isaiah. A lot of the scrolls were really quite a bit smaller, and they just contain sections of this or that. Luckily, because the climate there is very dry, very arid, the material that it was written on was able to kind of last that long. Like in Florida, this stuff wouldn't have lasted 20 years. It would have just been, the humidity would have eaten it up. But the Dead Sea, which I'll show you a picture here in a second. So we were looking at Cave 4 there. If you turn around and face east the other way, you can, I mean, there's the Dead Sea. And then across the Dead Sea, there's the modern country of Jordan. In fact, there's Mount Nebo, where Moses stood and looked the other direction into the promised land. That is the lowest place on earth. Like the lowest place in the US, I think, is Death Valley in California. The lowest place on the planet is the Jordan Valley, and particularly there at the Dead Sea. And it is extraordinarily dry. So yeah, so here's a picture. This is roughly there at Qumran, and it's just kind of turned around and now looking east. So the body of water that you see there, on which it is written BibleWalks.com, that's the Dead Sea, and then across the water, that's not Israel anymore. Now that's Jordan. So that's how close we are. And you see in the foreground there, those are date palms. There is a lot of fruits in particular that are, it's that valley, because the Jordan, it's so arid elsewhere, but because of the Jordan, they're able to irrigate it. And there's lots and lots and lots of vegetation, farming, agriculture that takes place there. So one of the nights we're going to go down and spend the night by the Dead Sea. We didn't always used to do this. Sometimes we just take little day trips there, but I much prefer kind of staying at the Dead Sea. So I think this is our hotel, if I got the correct one here. And so you can see it kind of just hugs the sea there, and we'll be able to walk from our rooms down to the water. The water will be warm. I'm not sure about what the weather will be in the rest of the country. Galilee shouldn't be too bad. It's possible Jerusalem will be a little cooler, but down by the Dead Sea it will be warm. It's warm there year round. And so we'll wear our bathing suits. We're gonna kind of wade out into the water. It's an amazing experience. If you imagine yourself kind of sitting down on a couch or kind of sitting down in a recliner and then just leaning back, and it'll just hold you up. And so people often take a book or a newspaper and they just sit back and read, because where else in the world can you do that? And we'll be careful not to get any on our face, because it could really sting. I mean, if you drank it, it could kill you. So don't do that. But it is a remarkable experience because of its low altitude. The water is evaporating at such a pace, it's kind of leaving all these minerals behind, which means it's really mineral rich. And a lot of that is mined by the Israelis. There's a popular cosmetic company called Ahava, which is Hebrew for love. And they do like mud mask and those kind of things. It's based here at the Dead Sea. I mean, there are a lot of things you might pick up as a souvenir, maybe a little piece of pottery or a little olive wood. Some people do like to buy the cosmetics. You actually can also get those on Amazon. So I don't know that that's necessarily the best thing, but you know, get what you want. All right. That'll be a really fun day. So this is a picture of the Judean wilderness. So when it says in the Gospels that Jesus went into the wilderness to be tempted, so Matthew and Luke will say Jesus was led by the Spirit. Mark's a little harsher. He was driven by the Spirit out into the wilderness. This is what it would have looked like. Now, I don't know about the rest of you, but I grew up in the Appalachian Mountains, and in the Appalachians, the wilderness does not look like this, right? I think of the wilderness and I think the woods. Like I thought Jesus basically went out on like Big Walker or you know, Mount Rogers or something. Those are the mountains that are close where I lived. Not this. Like, So the Greek word for that is translated wilderness there could also be translated desert. And I think if the Bible I grew up with had translated a desert, I might have thought more like this. But even this is pretty rocky. But this is what the Judean wilderness looks like. And so we don't know exactly where, of course, Jesus was in all of this area while he was being tempted. There is a temptation place that's been kind of commemorated. It's in the West Bank, and it's kind of hard to get to nowadays. It's kind of outside of Jericho. So it's one of those things we'll kind of point to, like, do you see that wall way up there on top of that mountain? That's a place that it's commemorated that Jesus was in the wilderness. I mean, there's nothing to say that that's actually the place that he was. So we'll just point to it. But yeah, you should think of something like this. And then also, I mean, I wish I had a slightly different picture, maybe more of a close-up to show you just how rocky this place is. Like, it is just rocks on top of rocks on top of rocks on top of rocks, which makes you think, in Matthew's account of the temptation, he says it a little differently than Luke does. He'll say, because he speaks in the plural, like, if you are the Christ, turn all these stones into loaves of bread. So he's using a plural for stones and a plural for bread. Well, to turn all those stones into loaves of bread would be enough to feed a nation, not enough to feed a person. But therein lies, I think, the temptation for Matthew, that Matthew seems to think Jesus is being tempted not simply to eat at the end of a long fast, but Jesus is being tempted to bypass God's path and to kind of short circuit that path and become the messianic deliverer. But Jesus says, a person doesn't live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of the Father, which seems to be an allusion to Deuteronomy and the story of the manna. But again, there's another part where it says, if Jesus kind of says, if these people, it's on his way to Jerusalem, if these people don't worship, the rocks will cry out. Well, it's such a rocky place, man. If the rocks ever actually did cry out, we'd all go deaf. I mean, it's the imagery. I think there's so many different things that being on location will give you a new kind of vision about what's being referenced in so many texts. So, switching stories just a little bit. In the Judean wilderness, or the wilderness earlier of Judah, David was fleeing from Saul. And so this is what that would have looked like. So you can imagine how difficult it would have been to survive here and how important finding water would have been in this kind of location. So part of one of the dry riverbeds that come down the eastern slope of the Mount of Olives and leads down into the Jordan Valley will eventually bring you to an oasis, not Oasis Community Church here in Lakeland. That's a different oasis, but it will bring you to an oasis named En-Gedi, which is where David hid from Saul. So this is En-Gedi. This is a place that looks like a beautiful tropical, oasis in the midst of that desert. So this is what it looks like in the neighboring area around En-Gedi, and this is what En-Gedi looks like. So it's a natural spring, and there's quite a bit of wildlife. There's quite a bit of foliage. There seems to be an endless amount of fresh water, and there are a lot of caves. And so you know those stories where David hid from Saul, and then one time David kind of cut off the end of his robe, and then he apologized because he felt guilty. I could have taken your life, and he's like, "Oh, I shouldn't have said that." But just really fascinating things. And another thing that kind of comes to my mind is one part of the wildlife that we'll likely see when we're here is a small deer known as the ibex. It looks like a little antelope, maybe. Its antlers are kind of long and curved. And so, again, if you think about this is the neighborhood that's in, and then you think about moving from there to an oasis like this, and then think about David kind of sitting in this area, by the brook, or maybe in a cave looking out at the brook, and seeing an ibex come just dying practically of thirst. And then you think of things like Psalm 40, where David writes, as the deer pants for the water, so my soul longs after you, O Lord. Like he probably had seen, again and again and again, a deer literally panting for water, coming up and taking a drink. And then he uses that as an analogy of his own kind of spiritual life, longing for God. We'll shift again now. We're in a different part now of the West Bank. So when I say the West Bank, just to make sure we all know what that term is. So the Jordan River, which flows from the north of Galilee into the Sea of Galilee, and then out of the southern part of the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea, that forms the western border of modern day Israel. So on the east of that is modern day Jordan, and on the west of that, on the west of the Jordan, is the West Bank of the Jordan, right? And so it's a disputed area. Originally, when the modern state of Israel was formed, it wasn't a part of the modern state of Israel. And then there was a war in 1967, and Israel occupied that area. And so Israel continues to occupy that area, and it is populated by a people group known as the Palestinians. And so the West Bank is kind of part of ancient Palestine. And it contains cities like Sumeria, like Jericho, like Ramallah, like Bethlehem, like Hebron. And so in particular, we might stop by Jericho, but we're definitely going to visit Bethlehem. So Bethlehem is in part of that West Bank, meaning the western part of the Jordan River. So this is the modern city of Bethlehem. You can see it's very hilly. At least I call it very hilly compared to where I live now. That kind of large building straight ahead is a hotel, but the kind of steeples behind it you can see is a major church known as the Church of the Nativity, built by Helena, Constantine's mother, commemorates the birthplace of Jesus. We'll go to Bethlehem. We'll visit the church. We'll also, while we're there, visit an olive wood shop. Nope, that's not the olive wood shop. This is at the Church of the Nativity. So the Church of the Nativity, there are two main sections. There's kind of an Orthodox section and there's a Catholic section. So this is just the doors here are the doors into the Catholic sanctuary. And once you walk in there, and we'll go in to the right, there's a staircase that goes down into a grotto in which Jerome lived, St. Jerome. And it was in that grotto that he translated the Bible from Hebrew and Greek into Latin. And that became one of the primary translations of the church for centuries after that, Jerome's translation. This particular statue here in the courtyard is of Jerome. So little personal side note, Jerome's family name was Hieronymus, and the Hieronymus family is related to Angela. So Angela has family who's are the Hieronymus. They had a seafood restaurant in Wilmington, North Carolina, but that's been a few years ago. But Aunt Marlene, Angela's aunt, if Aunt Marlene's ever around and you're around, we should all have her cook. Because she is a great cook. But that's completely a side note. But yeah. So I'd like to say this. So part of the story that's not told is Jerome had a mentor. And this is quintessential. This is why I should take better notes. I'm forgetting her name. We always forget the women's names. We don't tell their stories. Yes, Joseph, in Wilmington, North Carolina, was Hieronymus Seafood. And that was Angela's family. He said that in the chat. All right. So we'll visit this place. Well, typically we also stand in line and we go down in the Orthodox section. There is a little grotto again, and we go down and there's this place, this kind of marble place with this silver star over it. And this is commemorated as the birthplace of Jesus. Was Jesus born over that hole? Well, many in the church believe so. I believe Jesus was born in Bethlehem. I believe that this place had been commemorated as the birthplace of Jesus long before Helena ever commissioned a church to be built there, right? So the church that's there, the Orthodox Church, is some 1,600 years old. And when it was built in that location because tradition had it at that time that was the place or near the place. So again, it's not like maybe the square inch where it took place, but it is certainly in the right vicinity. This is the Nissan Brothers olive wood shop. I don't know which Nissan brother that is standing there. I don't recognize him. The guy who runs it is named Christopher Nissan, and he'll be very happy to tell you that his family is Christian and that they have been Christians there in Bethlehem since Christ. It's a bit of a sad story. Bethlehem is, I think, when I went there in the early 90s, I would say Bethlehem was about 80% Christian. And then when I went back 20 years later, it was about 50% Christian. And now I think Bethlehem is maybe 20% Christian. So it's become harder and harder for Palestinian Christians to live in the West Bank. It's not an easy place politically to kind of make your life. And the Israelis don't make it easy, and the Palestinians who aren't Christian don't make it easy. And so it's certainly, if you're going to pray, that certainly be a good group to pray for. Olive wood is a natural wood. It's very common the olive tree is very common in Israel, and olive wood is harvested and then crafted into chalices and figurines. I've lost track of how many nativities that we have now made of olive wood. I think maybe Angela and I have a problem. I don't know what you call an addiction to olive wood nativities. Like, I don't know the technical term for that. But if we can get in and out of Israel without buying another olive wood nativity set, I think it might be a miracle. We'll see. She's smiling. So I'm thinking maybe I'm not going to get out of Israel without us buying another nativity set. Maybe her goal is to buy enough to give every child one, in which case we probably need a couple more because we keep getting more kids. But I think it's a great souvenir. It's kind of a very kind of quintessential thing to get in Israel. I think Bethlehem, I mean, although they sell it everywhere, I think Bethlehem is a great place to get it. We'll spend a fair amount of time here at this particular shop. The tour agency that we're going with, Educational Opportunities, kind of always takes their tours here. I mean, even when I traveled before with other tour companies, they also took their tours here. In the past, we've always eaten, the Nissan brothers also in a restaurant next door. So we would go, we'd shop for a while and go next door to eat. but I wasn't really crazy about that restaurant. So this year, we're going to do something a little different. There is a restaurant in a different part of Bethlehem that sits overlooking the shepherd's field. It's really a valley, and it's called The Tent. And it is kind of, I hope it's operational when we're there. It is a kind of a quintessential Middle Eastern kind of Palestinian meal. Lots of vegetables and lots of spreads or sauces like the tzatziki's and the hummuses and the tabbouleh, and if you know those types of dishes. Anyway, I've had it in lots of different places, in Cyprus, in Greece, in Turkey, down on Kentucky Avenue, downtown Lakeland. And there's no place I like it better than at The Tent. Angela and I have been there before, and so our plan is to take everyone there while we're there. All right, I think that wraps up tonight. So we have one more week of this type of lesson with lots of pictures and lots of conversations about where we're going and what part of scripture that kind of corresponds to. And then 2 weeks from now, we will be we'll be watching a film together. And the film is called Masada. It tells of a particular place also down by the Dead Sea. It's a bit of a tragedy, but it's a very important story historically and then also culturally for the Jews. And so we'll watch that, and then we'll have a bit of a talk back and just a brief lesson about the significance of what went on there and what our experience will be like when we get to Masada. And that's week 4. So next week is a lot about Jerusalem. As you might imagine, we could maybe stack everything that we see on one side of a page and then stack everything you see in Jerusalem, and they're roughly the same. I mean, just think of your scriptures and how much takes place in Jerusalem, particularly, the Jesus story. So the Mount of Olives, the Temple Mount, Caiaphas's house, the Via Dolorosa, the Holy Sepulchre, which is where Jesus was buried, and just on and on and on and on. So that's what we'll focus on next week. Questions or comments? Angela, you have anything?
This is Steve Mosier, and I have a question.
Yes, Steve.
Are you, for those of us going on to Egypt after the Israel tour, will we get any kind of preview or tour
That's a good question
that we might be doing there?
I tell you what, I'm glad you asked. What I'll do next week, when I'm frozen. Can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
I hear you.
Okay. All right. I'm not just standing that still. Yeah, so what I'll do, I hadn't planned on it, but I can make an adjustment. What I'll do next week is we'll focus on Jerusalem, but then there's a few key sites at Mount Sinai and St. Catherine's, and I'm particularly excited about visiting there, as well as the Nile and Cairo and the pyramids, of course. So yeah, I'll be happy to show some pictures and review some of what we're going to see there. Our oldest complete copy of the Bible, it's called Sinaiticus. That wasn't a very clever name, but it was found in the Sinai at St. Catherine's, where we're going to be. Now, it's currently not there. It's at the British Museum in London, but that's because the Brits stole stuff when they were colonizing the world, and they did not give it back. So I thought about working out a deal with some of the nuns there at the convent and telling them that I'd be willing to steal it for them and bring it back, you know, do a little James Bond thing or Mission Impossible. But I don't know that I can actually pull that off. But yeah, we can definitely do that, Steve. Long story short, or short story long.
All right, well, thank you.
Yeah, happy to do so. Anyone else? Yeah.
Questions. It's not about our locations per se, but since you showed the place we're buying the olive wood items, how much, I don't remember what's been said about currency and what people are doing for that. So just some words of wisdom.
Yes. So Angela, can you chime in?
All right, is that good?
Yes.
Let me take off this. So we found that the best kind of way to go about it is having a little bit of cash in shekels, which you can get at an ATM machine there, but they take credit cards. So like if you're there at the Olive Nissan Brothers, I would just use my card from home there. You do need to call your credit card company or bank and tell them that you're going to be traveling. But the thing about using those bank cards is that you just get the best rate as opposed to going to like the airport and trading there. So what we usually do is when we get to Israel, we just go to an ATM machine and get some shekels. But most places will actually take dollars and shekels. So it's going to be nice to have some shekels, but yeah, most places take both. But I can't remember how much we get. I mean, we personally get probably, do you remember, Robbie? $100 in shekels, which at this point, I'm not sure how much that is. And then as the day goes, like as the trip goes, when we get to the end, then we'll just start, using the shekels up or bring some home for souvenirs. But mostly I would use my card.
Okay.
And really, so lunches, you will need cash because often where we go for lunch is just a little like place that's not going to take a card. Some places will, but we'll need some cash for that. And lunches are going to be about $10 to $12 per day. When we're in Bethlehem, we're buying that lunch for everybody. But other than those lunches, the only other money you're going to need is for souvenirs, or when we go, there'll be ice cream places or drinks. In the bus for $1, you can get like a bottle of water. But that's you have lunch and souvenirs. And souvenirs, certainly anywhere you go, you can use a card.
Okay.
Does that answer?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, and just in terms of souvenirs, I mean, there's lots of good things to get. Like, you might want to pick up some clothes or scarves. That seems to be popular. We bought a rug that I really love. We bought it in the old city. Don't take me into any place that you want to buy something. Part of the culture there is bargaining. And so it's not like, I don't know, it's not like you go to Walmart and you just buy something and this is how much it costs. There's an expectation that the price is negotiable. And so bargaining is part of the process. I'm particularly bad at it. I'm uncomfortable with conflict. And so I would offer to pay extra if they would just not hound me. Angela is just the opposite. She's always going to get the best price. I'm not trying to say something bad about her. I'm just saying she's a good bargainer. So, but I think, different people buy different things. I've bought icons in the past. We've bought a lot of olive wood. We've bought some pottery that we really like and cherish. I think I do have a couple of t-shirts. Some things might be a little, I don't know, kitschy, like getting a Coca-Cola t-shirt in Hebrew or something like that. But I don't know. I just like the look of it, right? I like the look of the Hebrew or the Arabic story. What you need?
Look here, talk there. Keep talking.
What am I doing?
We don't have your video.
Oh, okay, there you go. Oh, yeah, so there I am. I think they fixed it. Yeah.
The exchange rate, it says, is $1 is 3.18 shekels. If somebody was wanting to know the exchange rate.
Yeah, that's good to know. And your best exchange rate that you'll get is when you use your debit card or credit card, because you're getting what the bank gets. Like when you get cash, like at the airport or at a hotel, the exchange rate is not quite as good. I mean, it's not horrifically different, but it's not quite as good. All right. We don't want to labor our evening, but we don't only get to be together a few times. So if there are any other questions about the trip, about the hotels, about the locations, or experience in any way. Yeah, Kathy?
Just one more question about because I saw the note with the insurance and the mention of like, if you get stuck with quarantine and you have to stay longer. What else has the travel company been saying about that type of situation? Like, how often do we get tested while we're there, kind of thing?
Yeah, Angela, did you hear that?
I didn't hear all of it, Kathy. Could you repeat that?
How often is the travel company talking about us getting tested while we're there? Like, would we get stuck mid-trip somewhere, possibly?
I'm sorry, one more time.
Yes.
No, I had it. So she's saying, how often do we get tested? Is it
Oh, yes.
possible that we got tested somewhere mid-trip and would get quarantined at that point?
Yeah, no, not that. So you need to get tested before you, 72 hours before we go. And then when we land at the airport, they'll test us there. And then we do our trip. Before you come back, you have to get tested 24 hours before you get back into the United States, which is a United States rule. They'll come to our hotel and do that. And for those of us going to Egypt, we have to get tested to get into Egypt as well. So what if you happen to test positive, the United States won't let you in. So you would have to quarantine, and those costs would be on you. So EO said that they haven't, in all their trips since COVID, they've never had anyone test positive. So I think
Okay. But the travel insurance then does not cover that if we had to stay there?
So the one that, if the EO insurance?
That's what we did, yeah.
Yeah, it's worth asking.
Okay.
I'll ask that question. It's worth knowing beforehand on the one, but because we didn't get the EO insurance and we just needed health insurance. And so it was an add-on option on just that health insurance. So I added that onto ours. But I'll ask and find out, because there's a lot of people who have the EO insurance too, so.
Thank you.
Ange, can you say the thing again that you had said the other day about what kind of test you need with your passport number on it and stuff?
Yeah,
For the
so
72-hour.
Yeah, and I'll get out all this information on a list of exactly everything we need. But at 72 hours before we go, you need a PCR test. And on that, it needs to have your passport number. So I'm assuming that locally we can get a travel test, and I'm assuming that they put that on there. But I'll find out more details, exactly what we need. You're also just going to have a health form that we have to fill out for Israel, but it's literally just a form that you'll carry with you. In Israel, you have to have your passport, your vaccine passport with you too.
Gail wants to know if that can be handwritten on the COVID test.
All right.
I'll find out. But initially, now I haven't heard anything from them in a couple months. That was something he had told me early on. I think it has to be printed on there by the with the results, but let me find out before we actually worry about it.
That's just interesting to me, how that, like if you had it at the hospital or something, are you going to request your travel, information be put on there? I don't know, where they
Yeah.
put that.
So
maybe.
I didn't either. And
Okay.
then I just recently looking for a test for us when I was taking Cecily to get tested. Our hospital does travel tests, which isn't covered by insurance. But I assume that when you do that they're putting that on there, but I will find out for us.
And how much do they charge, Angela, for travel tests?
I mean, at this hospital, they charge $100 a test. Once
Okay.
again, that's just me kind of looking around. So let me find out for sure.
Yeah, and can you
Exactly.
find out how much we'll have to pay in Israel?
I will.
In Egypt and all that too. And
Yeah.
any idea of what time our flight from Egypt would be, if they could give us any clue on that?
Okay. And so the test cost was going down in Israel, which is why they hadn't kind of told us how much it was. But I think I would a lot less there, because it was last time he told me it'd be about $120 for all the tests. But that price was reducing. So, I mean, don't hold me to it, but I'll see now, because now we're close.
Have you talked to Emma since she's been over there, or is she still there?
I haven't. I need to look. So we have a friend that is in Israel right now, or may have just gotten back. So I'm going to message her and try to talk to her and see what her experience has been like, because it will be nice to have information from someone who just went and someone who will kind of openly share kind of what the experience was like for her.
Thank you all for all you're doing.
Oh, yeah.
Will Emma be a guest speaker next week?
Right.
Maybe I haven't talked to her in 20 years. She was a girl last time I knew her. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for showing up, and thanks for all the good questions and comments and engagement. And we'll do this a couple more times in preparation for the trip. And can't tell you how excited I am about getting to go and getting to be with you all and share these things with you. All right.
All right.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Thanks.
Bye, y'all.